All right, so general things. Whenever you use lights, they always need to create shadows. If they don't create a shadow, it will look super, super wrong. There are very, very rare occasions where it's fine to not have a shadow, and I personally don't know why cinema doesn't put a shadow here on default, but whenever you create a light, don't forget to choose your area shadow here. Then, in general, I don't think that spotlights are usually the thing that we need. Most of the time, if you want to get this light vignetting, this feeling of this being the important part and further down the road it should get darker, you can just work with the natural fall off that light has, which you can find under details, and then the fall off here. But let's just reset your light setup and start a little bit fresher. So let's get rid of these. And let's just apply a white material to the sky. Right now you added the blue material, so the sky hardly did anything. Let me just double check the settings. Quasi Monte Carlo is fine. Good. And also never hurts to add the denoiser. Okay, so when we now render this, we can see how we have just a very, very basic light that is being emitted here, and yeah, not much is happening, and I'm a little bit wondering why it's not showing up in the reflection here. Oh, because this is just I don't know where you've got this material from, although, no, here it's set to GGX. I would really expect to see a little bit more from it, since the sky is pretty visible. Let me just add a regular one. So a GGX the way that it's intended to be. Then in the layer Fresnel, we will change the Fresnel here to conductor, since I'm guessing this is supposed to be a metal. So dielectric is anything else, and conductor is a metal. There we go. So already when we render this, yeah, now you can see how this feels like metal. It's reflecting the sky, it's reflecting the floor, and it overall looks way more natural. Now, when we want to give this a color, we do it in here, and I'm guessing we can take the color that you've created down here. Let's enable it again so I can just copy it. Copy. And paste. So we get this noisy bluish color going on. Okay, this already looks a whole lot better. Let's do the same thing for this object here as well. So again, I'm not quite sure what kind of settings you did in there. This was a blue. I don't even remember what it was looking like before. I'll just use the same one here. So we'll get rid of this, add GGX, add in the texture, making sure that the Fresnel's conductor, and we don't use a color here. If you want this then to be a little bit more metallic or a little bit less colored, here is the mix strength, where you can say how much of this color do you want on there. So maybe just a little bit. And I'm guessing the cone here does not have a material yet. That's just missing. Okay. Now, when we render this, we can see how there's a lot of stuff happening, lots of things that we can see that are reflecting. Now, a metal always looks better when we have a proper geometry, so it has roundings where things can happen. Right now, what you did was, when you created the sweep here, for instance, you used, even though I told you not to, a Bezier. And essentially, you could have also just used a linear, because you only created points. Now, the disadvantage of doing it like this is that we don't get any roundings. We get completely sharp edges here, and that just always looks very artificial. So when we take a look here, let's disable this, this here. Nothing in this world is this sharp. So it is always better to have a little bit of a rounding in there. Now we can always add it later on by simply adding 2 points on these edges, and then we will get a nice smooth rounding when we switch to a B-spline. So let's do that by switching to the pen mode, to the pen tool, and to the point mode, holding down the command key and just creating points here. Now, when we select the spline and we switch to B-spline, you can see how it just creates this ever so subtle corner. Like from afar, it still looks very sharp, but we do have this nice little rounding, which will in turn make our reflections look so much better. So let me just undo this. I want to keep it busy for now, so I can easily add a couple of points here as well. So holding down command key, creating a point here and there, and here and there, and down here at the bottom as well. Oh, it's going into the floor. No, we don't want that. Okay, so let's grab these things and make sure that they're close to the floor, and like this, just to keep it clean. That's your 0? Where did you place the lathe? There's the lathe. Oh, you moved the spline inside of the lathe. So your spline here is not centered anymore, so it doesn't move exactly around the center. Since you want the shape to be this way, the easiest solution is to just go to the anchor point mode, making sure that the anchor point sits in the center, and then disable the anchor point again. So now we've only moved the anchor point without moving the points themselves. So when I now go back to the point mode and I select this point here, I can set it to 0 and it sits in the center the way that I would expect it to. Lastly, we can switch this to B-spline, and you can see how we get a little bit of a rounding here, a tiny bit of a nicer curvature here, and a little bit of a rounded corner at the top. Now, when we turn this back into a lathe and we render this, we will just see how we have a smoother transition on these edges here, and also the top here, where it's not just cut off, but where there's just a little bit of more detail on these edges. And that is what we're looking for. Now, when it comes to the rest of the light setup, I usually recommend using area lights, and the following things are the things that we usually want to change with area lights. First, we want to give it an area shadow, always important. Then we go to details, scroll down, and go to the fall off and change it to inverse square physically accurate. Let me go outside of the camera and let me move this back a little bit. Now by default, the reflection looks very artificial because a light is only creating a specula, but not a real reflection. To fix this, we will also go into the details, turn off the show and specula, and instead turn on the show and reflection. Now, what we will be able to see is a light reflecting in there, but the light needs to be bright enough for that. What I usually do is I adjust the size of the fall off to the size of the light. So I go to the object mode or model mode, doesn't matter, and I drag this down so it has roughly the size of my light. Then I can hit T and adjust the size of the light again, and the fall off and the light will grow together. Now we want to use this in order to kind of like light up the scene, but also to stylize a little bit. The light should always look at the lathe. So we right click on it, go to animation tags, and use the target tag. As the target, we'll use the lathe. So when we now move our light, it always points at the object, which is fairly convenient. Let me turn off this mode here so it's a little bit easier to move. Now we can move the light around. Now it is pretty dark, so it also doesn't really show up in the reflection. But when we now go into the light, into general, and we increase the intensity here, you can see how it increases how much light it emits, and it also increases how much we can see, the light source in, what's wrong with the rotation today? There we go. How we can see it in the reflection of the object. So by placing the light, we can then kind of stylize how the reflection on our object is going. What I often like to do is I go into the camera, then I go into the view over here, and I move my light around and figure out what a nice angle is where I can see it in different parts of the reflection. So maybe I also want it to be a little bit more on the side, something like this. So I have one light kind of like here. Maybe like so. Now going back here, I can render and see what this looks like. And now we can see how I have this nice, strong, metallic reflection going on this object. And we can start adding more lights. So maybe we add a second light, holding down Control and just moving it over. Maybe this one is a little bit further away. And maybe we put this a little bit more to the front. Ooh, see how it starts to reflect in there. That's nice. That's a nice touch. This can look nice. Okay, let's see. Nice. So now we can see we have this nice gradation in the floor here. It still fades into black towards the back, so there's no need for a spotlight. And when we set up our materials and the lights correctly, we have nice and natural shadows as well as strong reflections. Alrighty. Now, usually when we work with reflections that are this blurry, even though we have a denoiser, it usually doesn't do so well. So we can see already here it's very, very noisy, and even after the render is finished and the denoiser does its thing, it will probably still look kind of meh. So let me just let this finish and see what it looks like with the denoiser. Damn it. Okay, so I hope sometimes, yes, sometimes cinema does that. It does this weird thing where it just stops. I will try to find a freeze frame where we can see it, but I'm pretty sure that the denoiser didn't work perfectly. So in order to optimize this, we will go to the render settings, to the physical, and what we want to do is increase the blurriness subdivision. So whenever we have blurriness, and because of that we get noise, we can just increase the samples for that. We don't have to increase the samples for everything, just for the blurriness. So maybe here we will go to 6. And when we now render this, we should see how obviously it takes longer to calculate, but we should also see how it looks a lot smoother already before. Yeah, okay, so now we can see how it does take quite a lot longer to calculate. However, it also looks way smoother. Now the last thing that you want to do is actually not use a white light. So we can use a white light for the sky when we don't really have reflections, or if we are planning on creating something that looks a little bit more abstract or artificial. But this here is supposed to look, well, like an actual object. So I would go to HDRI Haven, and find a nice HDRI there, probably something indoorsy. And I usually, since I create the light myself, I look for something that doesn't have too many shadows. So I wouldn't take something like this where the lights are so harsh that they create strong shadows themselves. I usually try to find something with subtle shadows like this or this. I do want some nice details in the top so stuff can reflect. I think I like this one. This one seems nice. Yeah. Let's take that one. and we'll use this one as our material. So in the sky, and the luminance, we add it here. We can already see how on here it looks way more interesting. And when we render, you can see how we have some nice reflections from the HDRI in our object. Alrighty. So still not perfect, but I hope I have added a bunch of techniques in here that help you to optimize the look of your materials and lights.